What if I told you that the greatest prison escape in movie history had absolutely nothing to do with tunnels? Well, okay, technically there was a tunnel, but that tunnel, that was just the last piece of a plan that took 19 years to build. 19 years of patience, 19 years of silence, 19 years of a quiet man with a tiny rock hammer and a poster of Rita Hayworth. This is the story of Andy Dufresne, a man who walked into prison an innocent man, a man the system tried to crush, and a man who proved, in the most spectacular way imaginable, that hope is the one thing no wall can contain. This is the Shawshank Redemption. Now, before we dive in, let me set the scene. It's 1947. The Second World War is just a couple of years behind us. America is settling into a new kind of normal, and in a small town in Maine, a young banker named Andy Dufresne is sitting in a courtroom, listening to a prosecutor explain to a jury exactly why Andy murdered his wife and her lover, a golf pro she'd been seeing on the side. Here's the thing. Andy says he didn't do it. He admits he was angry. He admits he got drunk that night and sat outside their house with a loaded revolver. But he says he threw the gun into a river and drove home. The problem is, someone did shoot his wife and that golf pro. 4 rounds from a .38. And Andy had no alibi, no witnesses, and a demeanor so ice-cold that the jury just couldn't believe him. The verdict comes back. Guilty. 2 consecutive life sentences. No possibility of parole. And just like that, Andy Dufresne, a man who spent his days managing other people's money, is on a bus headed for the most brutal prison in Maine. Shawshank State Penitentiary. Now our story is actually told through the eyes of another man, a man who's been inside Shawshank for a long time. Ellis Boyd Redding, but everybody calls him Red. Red is the guy who can get things. Cigarettes, playing cards, a bottle of whiskey, a poster of a movie star. You name it, Red can smuggle it in. He's the unofficial merchant of Shawshank, and he's been here long enough to know exactly how this place works. Red remembers the day the fresh fish arrived. That's what they call the new inmates. He remembers looking at all of them, pale and terrified, stumbling off the bus in their street clothes. And he remembers Andy, because Andy was different. While everyone else was shaking and crying that first night, Andy was quiet, just still, like he was somewhere else entirely. Red says the other inmates took bets on who would crack first that night, who would be the one sobbing in their cell before lights out. Red put his money on Andy. He thought that skinny, quiet banker wouldn't last 5 minutes. He lost that bet. Andy didn't make a sound. Not that night. Not the next night either. But don't mistake quiet for safe, because Shawshank is not a place that respects silence. During Andy's first couple of years, he's assigned to the laundry, hard, grueling work, and he catches the attention of a gang called the Sisters, led by a predator named Boggs Diamond. The Sisters target weaker inmates, and Andy, thin, educated, an outsider in every way, becomes their favorite victim. Now, I'm not going to go into the details of what happens. You can probably imagine. But understand this, for those first 2 years, Andy fights back every single time. He never submits. He gets beaten black and blue, ends up in the infirmary more than once. But he never stops fighting. And that stubbornness, that refusal to break, it's the first clue about who Andy Dufresne really is. About a month after he arrives, Andy approaches Red in the exercise yard. He wants something, a rock hammer. Now, when Red hears rock hammer, he's picturing something big, something dangerous, something you could chip through a wall with. But when the thing actually arrives, it's tiny, about 6 or 7 inches long, the kind of thing a geologist would use to chip at stones. Red laughs when he sees it. He says you could hide that thing in your rectum and the guards would never find it. and he thinks, there's no way anyone's breaking out of prison with this. It would take a man about 600 years to tunnel through a wall with one of these things. Red was wrong about that estimate, by about 581 years. Now here's where things start to change. It's 1949, and the prison guards are up on the roof of the license plate factory, tarring it in the brutal summer heat. Andy and a group of inmates are working alongside them, and Andy overhears the head guard, a terrifying man named Captain Byron Hadley, ranting about an inheritance he just received and how the government's going to tax the life out of it. Now anyone else would have kept their head down. You do not talk to Captain Hadley unless Captain Hadley talks to you first. The man has a temper that makes thunderstorms look mild. But Andy? Andy walks right up to him, and in the calmest voice imaginable, tells Hadley he can save him every last dime of those taxes. Legally. For a moment, everybody holds their breath. Hadley grabs Andy by the collar and dangles him off the edge of the roof, 3 stories up. One wrong word, and he's a dead man. But Andy doesn't flinch. He explains, calmly, carefully, exactly how to shelter the money. And Hadley listens. 2 weeks later, Andy and his crew are up on that same rooftop, enjoying ice-cold Bohemia-style beers, courtesy of the hardest screw that ever walked a turn at Shawshank. And Red looks over at Andy, sitting there in the sunshine, sipping a beer he didn't even take for himself. He just got them for his friends. And Red says something beautiful. He says Andy looked like he was sitting on his own back porch, enjoying a beer on a warm summer evening. For just a few minutes, they felt like free men. And that's Andy's gift. He doesn't just survive prison, he finds tiny pockets of freedom inside of it. Little cracks in the wall where humanity can leak through. Word spreads fast about the banker who saved Hadley a fortune. Suddenly, Andy gets pulled out of the laundry and reassigned to the prison library, working under an old inmate named Brooks Hatlan. But more importantly, the guards start coming to Andy one by one. Help with taxes, help with savings, help with their kids' college funds. Andy does it all, free of charge. And then the warden comes calling. Warden Samuel Norton, a man who wears a cross on his lapel and quotes scripture like he's running a Sunday school. But behind that righteous smile is something rotten. Norton sees Andy's financial skills and realizes he's sitting on a gold mine. Because Norton has a scheme. See, Norton runs a program called Inside Out, putting prison labor to work on public construction projects. He wins the contracts by undercutting every legitimate bidder in the state, because his labor is basically free. Prisoners. And the kickbacks, the bribes, the money that flows through these projects, it all needs to be laundered. And who better to launder it than a convicted banker? Andy becomes Norton's personal money man. He creates a fake identity, a phantom person named Randall Stevens. This ghost has a social security number, a birth certificate, a driver's license, everything a real person would have. But Randall Stevens doesn't exist. He's just a name on paper, a vessel for dirty money. And Andy sets it all up so perfectly that if anyone ever investigates, they'll chase a man who was never born. Andy tells Red about this with a grim little smile. He says, "It took coming to prison to learn how to be a crook." But Andy doesn't just serve the warden. He builds something beautiful along the way. He writes letters to the state government, 1 letter every week for 6 years, asking for funding for the prison library. And the government does what governments do. They ignore him. So Andy starts writing 2 letters a week. Eventually they cave. They send money and boxes of books just to shut him up. Andy transforms that dusty little prison library into something extraordinary. The best prison library in New England. He names it after Brooks Hatlan. He stocks it with books, records, educational materials. He starts helping inmates get their high school diplomas. Guys who never thought they'd amount to anything are suddenly studying for their GEDs. Andy gives them something the prison system never bothered with, a future. And there's one moment, one scene, that captures everything Andy Dufresne stands for. He finds a record in one of those donated boxes. An opera, Mozart's Marriage of Figaro. Two Italian women singing a duet so beautiful it could make angels weep. And what does Andy do? He locks himself in the warden's office. He cranks the record player up to full volume, and he turns on the PA system. That music floods out across the entire prison yard. Every inmate stops what they're doing. The guards freeze. For 2 minutes and 37 seconds, the most beautiful sound any of them have ever heard pours out over Shawshank like rain. Men who haven't felt anything but anger and despair in years are standing there, looking up, with tears in their eyes. Red says he never understood what those Italian ladies were singing about, and the truth is, it didn't matter. Some things don't need to be understood. Some things are just felt. For those 2 minutes, every man in Shawshank was free. Andy spent 2 weeks in solitary for that stunt. When he came out, he said it was the easiest time he ever did, because he had Mozart in his head. And Red says that's the thing about music and about hope. They're things that live inside you, things no one can take away. Now I need to tell you about Brooks, because Brooks Hatland's story is one of the saddest things you'll ever see in a movie. Brooks has been in Shawshank for 50 years. 50 years. He arrived as a young man, and now he's elderly, stooped, feeding a baby crow he adopted named Jake. When Brooks gets his parole papers in 1954, he doesn't celebrate. He panics. He actually holds a knife to another inmate's throat. Not because he wants to hurt anyone, but because he wants to stay. The only world Brooks knows is inside these walls, and the thought of leaving terrifies him more than staying ever could. Red understands this perfectly. He calls it being institutionalized. The walls are funny, he says. First you hate them, then you get used to them, and eventually you depend on them. That's institutionalized. Brooks gets out. He takes a job at a grocery store, bagging produce with hands that shake from age and fear. He can barely cross the street without feeling like the world is moving too fast. He has nightmares. He thinks about ways to break his parole just to go back. One night, Brooks carves something into the wooden beam of his halfway house room. Brooks was here, and then he kicks away the table beneath him. I'm not going to lie to you. That scene hits like a freight train every single time. Because Brooks isn't a villain. He's not even a bad man. He's just a man who was forgotten. A man the system swallowed whole and then spat out into a world that had moved on without him. Now time keeps moving inside Shawshank, and in 1965, a new inmate arrives. A young hotshot named Tommy Williams. Tommy's a career burglar, in and out of prisons his whole adult life. He's cocky, charming, and completely uneducated. Andy takes a liking to him and starts tutoring him for his GED. Tommy works hard. He studies every night, and he passes. The look on his face when Andy tells him he passed, pure joy. For a guy like Tommy, who's been told his whole life that he's nothing, this is everything. But Tommy brings something else to Shawshank. Something that changes everything. See, at his last prison, Tommy had a cellmate, a guy named Elmo Blatch. And one night, Blatch got to bragging about a job he did. He told Tommy how he broke into a house, found a woman with her lover, and shot them both dead. 4 rounds from a .38. And the best part? Some hotshot banker husband took the fall for it. Tommy is telling this story to Red and Andy, and you can see it hit Andy like a lightning bolt. This is it. This is proof. After all these years, here is another man confessing to the crime Andy was convicted for. Andy is innocent, and now there's a witness who can prove it. Andy goes to Warden Norton with this information. He's not demanding. He's not threatening. He just wants Norton to help him get a new hearing. That's all. just a chance to present this evidence. But Norton doesn't see a man who deserves justice. He sees a problem. Because if Andy gets a new trial, if Andy walks free, who launders the money? Who keeps the books? Who protects Norton's empire of corruption? Andy knows everything. He's a liability. Norton throws Andy in solitary confinement for 2 months. 2 months in the hole, a dark box barely big enough to stand in. And while Andy sits in the dark, Norton gives Captain Hadley an order, and that night, when Tommy Williams walks into the yard for a private conversation, Hadley shoots him dead. They call it an escape attempt, but everyone knows there was no escape attempt. When Andy finally comes out of solitary and learns what happened to Tommy, something in him changes. The light behind his eyes goes quiet. He sits with Red in the yard, and for the first time he talks about the future. He tells Red about a little town on the Pacific coast of Mexico, Zihuatanejo, a place where the ocean is warm and the sky goes on forever. He says he wants to buy a little boat, fix it up, take tourists out fishing. And he tells Red about a place in Buxton, Maine, a hayfield with a long stone wall, and at the north end of that wall there's a big oak tree. He tells Red, if you ever get out of here, go to that tree. There's something buried underneath it that's meant for you. Red gets scared. He's never heard Andy talk like this. This sounds like a man making his final arrangements, a man saying goodbye. Red begs him not to do anything stupid. And the next day, someone tells Red that Andy asked another inmate for about 6 feet of rope. Red doesn't sleep that night. He lays in his cell, staring at the ceiling, convinced that when morning comes, they're going to find Andy Dufresne hanging from the pipes. Morning comes. The guards do their count. They reach Andy's cell. They call his name. No answer. They open the cell. It's empty. The bed is made. The cell is spotless. Andy Dufresne is gone. Warden Norton storms in, screaming. He tears the cell apart, looking for answers. And in his fury, he picks up a rock and hurls it at the poster hanging on Andy's wall. It's been Rita Hayworth, then Marilyn Monroe, then Raquel Welch over the years. The rock goes right through it, because behind that poster, there is no wall. There's a hole, a tunnel, carved inch by inch, night after night, for 19 years with that tiny little rock hammer Red smuggled in all those years ago. Remember when Red said it would take a man 600 years to tunnel out with one of those? He forgot to account for one thing. He forgot to account for Andy Dufresne. The tunnel leads to the main sewage pipe. Andy cracked it open, squeezed inside, and crawled. 500 yards. That's the length of 5 football fields. Through raw sewage, in the dark, not knowing if the pipe would narrow or if he'd get stuck. He crawls through 500 yards of filth that would make most people vomit just thinking about, and he comes out the other side, into a creek, in a thunderstorm. And there's this shot, this iconic, unforgettable shot. Andy standing in the rain, arms outstretched, face turned up to the sky. The sewage washing off him, the rain pouring down. And for the first time in 19 years, he's breathing free air. That image, that one single image, might be the most beautiful thing cinema has ever given us. But Andy isn't done. Oh no, he's far from done. See, when Andy crawled through that tunnel, he took something with him. Norton's suit, Norton's shoes, and most importantly, Norton's ledger. Every dirty dollar, every bribe, every laundered cent, all documented in Andy's meticulous handwriting. The next morning, a man who looks a lot like a banker walks into a dozen different banks across Portland. He's wearing a nice suit. He has identification for a man named Randall Stevens, and one by one, he withdraws the money from Norton's accounts. Over $370,000. that phantom identity Andy created for the Warden. He built it for himself too. Randall Stevens was always his escape plan, and then Andy mails the ledger, every last piece of evidence, to the Portland Daily Bugle. By the time the state police arrive at Shawshank, Captain Hadley is in handcuffs, and Warden Norton. Norton sees the police cars pulling up outside his window. He opens his safe, and inside, where the ledger used to be, he finds Andy's old Bible. He opens it, and there's a hollowed-out section inside, exactly the shape of a rock hammer, and a note from Andy. It says, "Dear Warden, you were right. Salvation lay within." Norton puts a bullet in his own head before the police can reach his office. Now the story could end there, but the most important part is still to come, because this story was never really about Andy escaping from prison. It was about Red learning to escape from himself. Red goes before the parole board. He's been denied so many times over the years. Every time, he puts on his best face and tells them what they want to hear, that he's rehabilitated, that he's learned his lesson, and every time they stamp his file, rejected. But this time, something is different. Red is tired of playing the game, so when they ask him if he's been rehabilitated, he doesn't perform. He looks them dead in the eye and says, "Rehabilitated? It's just a bullshit word. So you go on and stamp your form, Sonny, and stop wasting my time. Because to tell you the truth, I don't give a sh." They approve his parole, and Red steps out into the same world that swallowed Brooks whole. He gets the same job at the same grocery store. He sleeps in the same halfway house, and he starts to feel it, that same crushing weight of a world that moved on without him. He stands at his window and looks at the beam where Brooks carved his name, and he thinks about adding his own. But then he remembers the oak tree, the stone wall in Buxton, Andy's promise. Red takes a bus out to the countryside. He walks along that stone wall until he finds the biggest oak tree he's ever seen. And at the base of that tree, buried under a rock, he finds a tin box. Inside is money, enough for a bus ticket, and a letter from Andy. And the letter says, "Dear Red, if you've come this far, maybe you're willing to come a little further. Remember, hope is a good thing, maybe the best of things, and no good thing ever dies." Red violates his parole. He buys a bus ticket south, and as the bus crosses the border into Mexico, Red says the most beautiful words ever spoken by Morgan Freeman, which is really saying something. He says, "I find I'm so excited I can barely sit still or hold a thought in my head. I think it's the excitement only a free man can feel, a free man at the start of a long journey whose conclusion is uncertain. I hope I can make it across the border. I hope to see my friend and shake his hand. I hope the Pacific is as blue as it has been in my dreams. I hope." And then we see it. The wide blue ocean, white sand, a beautiful old boat on the beach being sanded down by a man with patient hands. Red walks across that sand. Andy looks up, and two old friends, separated by concrete and barbed wire and 19 years of injustice, see each other as free men for the very first time. You know, The Shawshank Redemption came out in 1994, and here's a wild piece of trivia for you. It was actually considered a box office disappointment. It barely made back its $25 million budget in theaters. Critics loved it, but audiences just didn't show up. It was nominated for 7 Academy Awards and won exactly 0. But then something happened. It hit home video, and word of mouth, that slow, unstoppable force, took over. People would rent it, watch it, and then call their friends and say, "You have to see this." It became the most rented film of 1995, and it just never stopped. Year after year, generation after generation, people discovered it and fell in love. Today it sits at number 1 on IMDb's top 250 films of all time. A movie that failed at the box office became the most beloved film in the history of cinema. And here's a fun little detail. Stephen King sold Frank Darabont the rights to his novella for just $1. One single dollar. And he never cashed the check. After the film became a phenomenon, King had the check framed and sent it back to Darabont with a note. Because some things are worth more than money. I think the reason this movie endures is because it tells us something we desperately need to hear. That the world can be cruel. That systems can be corrupt. That innocent people suffer. But that none of it, can kill the part of you that hopes, the part of you that imagines a better life and refuses to let go of that vision, no matter how many years it takes. Andy Dufresne crawled through 500 yards of sewage and came out clean on the other side. And if that's not a metaphor for the human spirit, I don't know what is. Get busy living or get busy dying, that's the choice. And Andy Dufresne chose to live. If this story gave you chills, hit that subscribe button and leave a comment telling me, what's your favorite scene from the Shawshank Redemption? Was it the opera? The rooftop beers? That moment in the rain? I'd love to hear it. And until next time, keep a little hope alive. Because no good thing ever dies. See you around the campfire.